Okay, well, welcome everyone to today's call. My name is Rachel Perić. I'm the Executive Director of Welcoming America, and it is an absolute delight to be hosting today's conversation on community sponsorship of refugees. We have three amazing panelists with us today who I'll introduce in just a moment. Again, just so thrilled to see that we've got folks really from every corner of the country and even the globe here joining with us today. And we know how much that means because the fact is that people are going to all corners of the country and globe right now. And we want to make sure in this moment that they are received with the greatest welcome possible. And we know that's why you're here today with us too. So if we could just go maybe to the next slide and just talk about a little bit of housekeeping things for today's call. Feel free to use the chat, either for questions or if you need something from us on the back end. Our conversation today is going to be recorded and it will be posted online and sent to anyone who registered for today's call. I do want to stress that the information on today's webinar is not for publication. This is an off-the-record conversation. And we also hope one where you won't be shy in sharing the work that you're doing locally with us and also asking your questions. That's why we're all here today. I just want to say, just taking a step back from today's conversation, what an important moment this is for all of us who are involved in the work of creating welcoming communities. The arrival of Afghans in the United States, which we know is just one piece of the migration puzzle that we're all here working on, is a really important piece in that puzzle because it really provides all of us with an opportunity to step back and build a bigger movement for welcoming and for helping folks in our community really move into these values in the process of creating an environment in which Afghans, but also other immigrants and really people who've been in the community all their lives can be successful in. And that's really the day-to-day work that we are invested in here at Welcoming America, supporting communities everywhere to create the conditions for everyone, inclusive of immigrants, to thrive, to belong, and to prosper, and to really amplify and support that work through the leadership of communities. And we know that's where the buck is going to stop in the success of this. And we know that's what you are all carrying on your shoulders. And we know too that there are several things that are going to make this a successful welcoming effort. And I think it's fair to say that over the last decade of Welcoming America's work and also through work that we did at Welcoming America through a program called Welcoming Refugees and through the work that all of you as our members and partners do every day, we've observed that there are really three things that make up a welcoming infrastructure that I think we can all be reinforcing in this moment. And the first is about collective action, really coming together from wherever we're situated in a community with shared purpose around fostering an environment in which each of us, including new Afghan arrivals, can fully belong and thrive and be successful. A second pillar or leg on the stool is really about ensuring that our institutions, whether public institutions, schools, community centers, are really looking systematically at bringing down the barriers that people face to being full participants in the community, civically, socially, economically. And those are two things that we know we'll be working on long term. But the third leg of the stool is really about bringing about this culture in which people can see one another as neighbors, as equals, and really building the bridges and the connectivity and the narrative to make sure that that's possible so that us versus them can become quickly we. And so I'm very excited about the role that community sponsorship can play in that, in bringing more people in. And I see our job in this moment as welcomers, as welcoming in the many new people who want to be part of creating a welcoming community. And I'm just so excited to have these three incredible women here today who have been doing this, not just I think as their professional careers, but as their life's work, and are going to help us unpack what is a complicated moment with some next steps that I hope can get more folks off the sidelines and involved in the work ahead of us. So first, joining us is Una Bilic, who is IRC's, the International Rescue Committee's Program Officer for Community Sponsorship. And she has been there since 2015 and has over 11 years of experience in leadership and management, and herself came from Sarajevo, Bosnia. I am also really pleased that we're joined today by Sarah Kraus, who is the co-founder and executive director of the Community Sponsorship Hub, a great partner of ours and an organization dedicated to growing the role of communities in the protection, resettlement, and integration of refugees and other forcibly displaced people. And she herself brings more than 20 years of experience working in refugee services. And then last but not least, we're joined by Shrina Eadeh, who is the Director of Resettlement Services at Jewish Family Services of Washtenaw County, Michigan, who has also worked for a decade in various settings with individuals and families of diverse backgrounds. And so much more that I know they'll be sharing in their presentations, and we're going to turn to that now. And maybe we can start with you, Una. Would love to hear from you about ways that folks can get involved in community sponsorship.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning if you are all the way on the west side of the United States. My name is Una Bilic, and I am the program officer for community sponsorship, and I work for the International Rescue Committee. I am also a refugee. I came to the United States in 1994 from Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and actually very interesting, I came through a form of community sponsorship through a resettlement agency back in 1994. And we can go ahead and move to the next slide. I know the definitions can be boring, but I think they're so important in this context. So I wanted to start by talking about what exactly is community sponsorship. So before Sarah goes and before Shrina goes, let's have like a basis. So community sponsorship is when there are groups in the community. Now, these groups do not have to be 501c3 organizations. That requirement was actually lifted a few years ago. So these community groups can be your local book clubs, it can be your corporations, your local businesses, it can be your university clubs, it can of course be your faith-based groups, sports teams, and anything in the community that is a standardized and set club. That's who we work with when we're talking about community sponsors. So it's these groups that are then paired with refugee families with the purpose of assisting with resettlement. Now, community sponsorship, think about it as an overarching umbrella definition. So community sponsorships are in a sense where groups can help with either in-kind donations, they can contribute financially to the family, or they can actually do the services and volunteer their time to assist families in provision of services such as enrolling kids into school, attaining personal documentation, and many other forms of services that are required in the world of resettlement. And I'll go ahead and next to the slide. So I stole this from Sarah. She created this super amazing chart that I just think really breaks down community sponsorship to the most practical levels. I also want to be fully transparent in saying that this chart has grown in the last 2 months to more boxes that can fit into a Word document. So I wanted to, before we would just have like what you see on the right is what we had. And in the last 2 months, it has grown tremendously. So I'll go ahead and first talk about the right-hand side of community sponsorship, and then introduce the left-hand side and have Sarah take over from there. Looking at the right-hand side of this chart, you will see, as I said, community sponsorship being the overarching umbrella definition, and then you go to resettlement-led community sponsorship. Resettlement-led community sponsorship, it means this type of community sponsorship directly involves a resettlement agency. I believe many of you know what a resettlement agency is, but just in case you don't, these are the 9 agencies in the United States, International Rescue Committee being one, Church World Services being another, USCCB being another, and the list goes on. So these are agencies that actually receive and support refugees, and they are governed and managed by the State Department, PRM to be more exact. So when you have a resettlement-led community sponsorship, it means that one of these 9 agencies is directly involved in this type of community sponsorship. So we'll go and talk about support teams. I think this is where many of you may have already been interacting in a sense of community sponsorship. I am in Tallahassee, Florida, and I was a site manager for the IRC office in Tallahassee for many years. And we would work with a lot of support teams. Sometimes they're called welcome teams, resettlement teams, many different definitions for these, but we're really trying to combine all our terminology and call them support teams. These are individual groups. So going back, once again, groups. Anything in community sponsorship is really group-based. So support teams are groups of volunteers that are particularly dedicated to a certain service. In Tallahassee, we use the Latter-day Saints community to do every single home setup for us. So the elders and the sisters would set up every home when we had a refugee family announced. So that was a version of a support team, a home setup. Some other offices may work with support teams in cultural orientation, where volunteer groups may teach refugees or APA clients in utilizing public transportation, in opening bank accounts, and many different sort of very specific services. So think of your support teams as groups who are really dedicated to something very specific. Then I'm going to go ahead over to the end and talk about co-sponsors. Co-sponsors, it's a group, but it's a group that takes on the responsibility of providing the majority of the core services for the family. So the co-sponsor teams up with the local resettlement agency. So for an example, coming back to Tallahassee, it would be a group in Tallahassee teaming up with the IRC Tallahassee office and coming together in a non-legal binding agreement and working on delegating who does what service. Majority of these services, we do want the co-sponsor to do, as it will help the agency and the local office with the heavy lifting. So co-sponsorship does take a lot of time. It does take a lot of work, but it is also very rewarding because it's an exact way that a group, a nonprofit group, a community group can get involved in the world of resettlement and actually help directly resettle a family. And then something so new, we're talking about maybe 5 weeks new, is this APA Community Partner Program that was established by PRM, once again, which is a little umbrella of the State Department. So the APA Community Partner Program came through via PRM and specifically focused on our Afghani arrivals, which is the APA stands for Afghani parolees. So PRM knows that we have over 65,000 APA clients in the United States. And that is a lot for any resettlement agency to take on. Even dividing amongst the 9 of us, it is quite a lot of work. So PRM came with an announcement stating that we now have remote access to resettle anywhere. So that means in any city, in any state, in the United States, including Puerto Rico, even if there's not a local resettlement agency in your city. So I'll give you an example. A veterans group from Lebanon, Tennessee. I didn't even know there was a Lebanon, Tennessee. No offense to anybody if they're from Lebanon, Tennessee on this call. Contacted me at the International Rescue Committee and said, hey, we're a veterans group. This topic is really dear to our hearts. We want to help in resettlement of a family. So I work with that group at the IRC headquarters level in helping them become an APA community partner and helping them attain a family through the assurance process. So just to in summary, as it is something so new, APA community partners do not work with the local field offices. So they will work with, these groups will work with the 9 resettlement agencies at the headquarters level. And this is to really expand resettlement across the United States and expand placement of cases where there's no resettlement field office currently present. And we can go to the next one. And this is these are the definitions, the more concrete definitions. I like to freestyle it and make it more realistic, but these are the actual definitions of what I just went over: the co-sponsorship program, the support service teams, and the APA community partner, which is a brand new program. And we can go to next slide. And now here we are. If we go back to the chart, I'm so sorry, Anthony. So if we go back to the chart, now we're now we're on the left-hand side of the chart, which is historic. It is historic, ladies and gentlemen. It's never been done in the United States, and we're so excited and open and welcome to this. And this is community-led community sponsorship. So what does that exactly mean? It means that resettlement agencies such as myself, we have absolutely no work to do, in a sense, or no responsibility, in a sense, maybe that's a better word, in community-led community sponsorships. So we're going back to that group structure. Remember, groups, your local book club, your local Rotary club, your faith-based groups, your university groups, they, independently of any resettlement agency, can apply to a program such as the sponsor circles that you see here, and raise funds and take on the full delegation of services and work with a refugee family or an Afghani family in helping them with all of their resettlement needs, integration, employment, etc. And Sarah's going to talk a little bit more about, well, a lot more about the sponsor circles, as this is her baby. But another thing that's expected to come, we do know this, the White House has announced it, the political administration has announced it, that in the early 2022, the official definition of private sponsorship will be released. And with that official definition being released, that will open up the field of private sponsorship. And then for the first time in the United States, there will be community groups doing full private sponsorship. What that looks like, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows yet. All we know is that Canada's been doing it for years. If you ever hear the Canadian model, that is a form of private sponsorship. We know that the Canadians have worked with the United States and the State Department to establish a private sponsorship model that will be released in early 2022 for us, but we don't know what that looks like yet. So in summary, we have community sponsorship as the overarching definition that's broken down then into two sectors: the resettlement-led community sponsorship, meaning your local field offices, your local resettlement agencies are directly involved in this form of community sponsorship. And then we have the community-led community sponsorship, which is the definition coming soon about private sponsors and the brand new sponsor circles. And with that, I think is a great segue for me to pass it on to Sarah so she can introduce sponsor circles and what exactly they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Una. And I always want to follow you in presentations. Give me life, give me energy. So my name is Sarah Krause. I am the co-founder and executive director of the newly established Community Sponsorship Hub. I actually came to this work more than 20 years ago as a sponsorship developer, a co-sponsorship developer. I, prior to that, was working as an intern with the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, now Human Rights First, assisting with the preparation of asylum cases, and came across an article about Sierra Leone and saw a picture of a young boy who had been orphaned by the war. I was really moved by that and knew that I wanted to do something to help, but didn't quite know what to do, which I think is how a lot of folks have felt over certainly the last several months. And a few weeks later, I attended an ecumenical conference and I was seated next to an elderly Presbyterian couple. I talked to them about this little boy, and they talked to me about their church's experience with community sponsorship, which was something I hadn't heard of before. And I decided then that I really wanted to I really wanted to dedicate my life to refugee work. And my first job out of school was as a co-sponsorship developer, going out to encourage, at the time, area congregations. That was our constituency, and partnering with our agency in the provision of core services to newly arriving refugees. We can move to the next slide. So the Community Sponsorship Hub was established just a few months ago, although visioned for a while, to grow the role of local communities in the protection, resettlement, and integration of refugees and other forcibly displaced people. And we are interested in community sponsorship in all forms, as Una said, everything that falls under that umbrella. One of the things that we have done that you may have heard about is launching of the Community Sponsorship Catalyst Fund that previously was with Refugee Council USA, where I was serving as a consultant. It was incubated there and is now housed with the Community Sponsorship Hub. And through the Catalyst Fund, we've awarded more than $4 million to organizations across the country to really expand community sponsorship opportunities. We can go to the next slide. Our vision is a future where the whole of society meaningfully engages in the protection, welcome, and integration of refugees and other forcibly displaced people. And I will just note here that I think the welcoming movement and the community sponsorship movement are really closely aligned. And we're so thrilled with our partnership with Welcoming America, because we both are really wanting the same things. And I think that's true of all of us on this call. Next slide. And I am now transitioning over to talk about the Sponsor Circle program. So while the Sponsor Circle program is an initiative that's been stood up by the Community Sponsorship Hub, it is a coalition effort that's been taken on by a number of agencies, including International Rescue Committee, Integrated Refugee and Immigrant Services, Welcome.us, Refuge Point, and others. Can go to the next slide. The Sponsor Circle program really is an emergency response to the current situation of which I'm sure you are all aware. We have tens of thousands of Afghan newcomers that are at safe havens across the United States awaiting placement in welcoming communities. And we know that our resettlement agency partners are really overstretched, many of them, and it's just taking a little bit longer to place those cases, I think, than any of us would like. This is being stood up as an emergency initiative in order to allow for the welcoming of more folks into communities across the United States, as we know that a lot of communities are really excited and ready to engage and welcome. We can move to the next slide. So just to take a quick step back, going back to Una's previous comments about community-led resettlement, as we were looking at this current crisis, we really had to ask ourselves, like, what can community sponsorship do to support in this space? And certainly there is a tremendous benefit to community sponsorship that's led by resettlement agencies. But in that model of community sponsorship, the resettlement agency is ultimately responsible to ensure service provision. And of course, if a resettlement agency is already at capacity, they're going to be challenged to take on more cases, even if there is potentially a co-sponsor that's available to support, because they are ultimately responsible. I will say that we've seen a number of agencies really grow their capacity through use of co-sponsorship. We hope that that continues. And through the Community Sponsorship Catalyst Fund, have been funding initiatives in order to help that work grow. But we had to think about other tools that we could put in our toolbox. And one of those tools is private sponsorship. And we were really drawing on what we've seen done successfully in a number of other countries around the world. I noticed New Zealand is on the call. Canada has a very successful private sponsorship model. We can't call this private sponsorship because the US government hasn't yet defined private sponsorship. Private sponsorship means different things to different people. When some folks think about private sponsorship, they really think about naming. Naming is something that we think is likely to be a part of the private sponsorship pilot that will occur in 2022. I will say, I don't know that it's going to be early 2022 because of the work that's currently ongoing and responding to this crisis, but we continue continue to push on that because we think it's a good thing. With private sponsorship, that could allow a group to actually identify an individual that has, as using Afghanistan as an example, who has fled Afghanistan, is in a second country, but has not been able to come to the United States. If they had family members or friends or veterans groups that knew of those folks, they could identify them through private sponsorship, note their own capacity to provide support after arrival through private sponsorship that then could potentially serve as a referral to the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. Again, that doesn't yet exist in the United States, but the Sponsor Circle program really helps to lay the foundation for that future program. And it's one of many reasons why we're excited to stand it up. It really helps to establish that infrastructure and some of the systems that will need to be in place in order for private sponsorship to occur and moving forward. Private sponsorship is going to be available to all populations, noting a question that's in the chat box right now. In the same that would be true for private sponsorship. For the Sponsor Circle program, the Sponsor Circle program is specific to Afghan humanitarian parolees with a real focus on those who are currently at safe havens. I would note too, actually, Una, this is going to surprise you. We did have private sponsorship in the United States that existed during the first two Reagan administrations and ended during the first Clinton administration. And the reason that it ended is because at the time it was requiring that private sponsor groups also cover health insurance, which we know in the United States is a significant expense. That isn't likely to be the case for the new program and is not the case for sponsor circles. So with the Sponsor Circle program, it allows groups of individuals, and this group of 5 model, again, is something that we have borrowed from our Canadian friends. It allows a group of 5 individuals to come together. Those need to be 5 individuals that are over the age of 18, that reside in or near the same community. They can come together to form a circle. They need to complete mandatory background checks, raise $2,275 per newcomer that they wish to support, and demonstrate that they've already raised 60% of that before they can be certified. They complete an online course and a knowledge check accompanied with that. And then they need to develop a tailored welcome plan for the newcomer family. And this is really critically important. Unlike co-sponsorship, where a resettlement agency is ultimately responsible to provide the services, in this case, it's really up to the group. And so the responsibility is on us to ensure that the group is well prepared prior to being certified and matched with a family. So in that welcome plan, they have to answer a number of questions, including how it is that they're going to facilitate cultural connections, how they're going to prepare for temporary and permanent housing, how they are going to ensure that benefits and services are accessible. And they're encouraged to reach out to local community members in advance of submitting their welcome plan, like sharing the point of contact with Department of Social Services, sharing their point of contact who would conduct initial health screenings, et cetera. Again, the cost is $2,275 per newcomer. And that is really meant to mirror the amount that resettlement agencies would receive to provide supports, those same services to newcomers that are served through the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program. Really, the two programs are meant to mirror each other. We can move on to the next slide. So these are the Sponsor Circle responsibilities. And this is just an abbreviated list, but it's essentially the same services that would be provided by a resettlement agency through the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program. And these are just core services that we know need to be provided in the first 30 to 90 days after arrival. For newcomers that are interested in being served through this program, they have to opt in through a process of informed consent. So once the newcomer family has been identified by a partner, and that's in this case, it's actually IRC who's working with us and representing the program with the US government and the system that's used to track newcomer cases at safe havens. I should note the Sponsor Circle, if they happen to know a newcomer, either because it's a family member or because they served together previously, they can indicate their interest in providing support to that particular family. If they're open to providing support to any family, they can note that that. And then they would just note the maximum number of people that they can support. Like they know they have housing secured for a family of 4, and that's what they're capable to do. Once we have that information, we call the newcomer family in, we share the option with them. They have time to think about it. If they elect to participate in that program, they're essentially noting that they won't access our APA services that are provided by resettlement agencies, and are instead are electing to be served by a trained, certified group of volunteers. Next slide. And just noting that sponsor circles are not in it alone. There are a number of supports that are available to them, including housing credits available via Airbnb.org, another coalition partner, application support via partner organizations, and then ongoing guidance provided by partner organizations. These partner organizations are referred to as sponsor circle umbrellas, and those sponsor circle umbrellas provide not only ongoing support, but also ongoing oversight of the cases. So the newcomer is provided with a contact information of someone to whom they can report any potential concerns. And then there's also 30 and 90-day reporting that's done. So it's a really exciting initiative. As Una shared, it's one of many forms of community sponsorship. But one of the things that's really exciting about it is that it's a really standardized process. It's clear. It doesn't vary depending on where you are in the country. You know what it is that you need to provide because it's a standard program. And again, really lays the foundation for private sponsorship in the future, and also helps us to respond to this emergency, ensuring that we have fewer newcomers that are departing from safe havens, also known as our military bases, without support from groups. So happy to address questions as they come up, and really excited now to turn it over to our colleague who I know was funded under HIAS as part of the Catalyst Fund 3.0 awardees. So with that, we'll turn it over to Shrina.
Thank you, Sarah. My name is Shrina Eadeh. I'm the Director of Resettlement Services at Jewish Family Services of Washtenaw County. I've been working in resettlement for over a decade. First starting out as an intern in our refugee resettlement program right here at JFS, moving on to working in employment here, and then eventually working my way up to oversee the programs that we have. My primary role right now is to oversee our reception and placement program, which I call RNP, our Afghan Placement Assistance Program, which is APA, and then I have post-resettlement services that I oversee as well, including refugee behavioral health. Next slide, please. So a little bit about our agency. We started our resettlement efforts over 40 years ago when individuals were coming from the former Soviet Union. A group of volunteers in our community decided that they really wanted to help in this resettlement effort. Our agency was formally became an agency in 1993, and since then we've resettled more than 1,000 refugees, special immigrant visas, and other types of visa holders and other types of immigrants from all over the world. We are currently the only resettlement agency in our county, and we provide a continuum of services from pre-arrival all the way through naturalization. When I first started about 8 years ago, there was just our resettlement program and our employment program. And since then, we've mindfully built our programming on a holistic model of a wraparound approach, which really focuses on addressing sort of all the critical needs that individuals have that leads to their long-term success. Next slide, please. So our holistic approach is based off of making sure that individuals' physical, emotional, social, and spiritual well-being is cared for. And we do this through our continuum of services, including making sure that individuals have that social support that is so imperative to their success. And so that, next slide, please. And so that is really why we decided to bring on our co-sponsorship program, because a lot of individuals who come have limited social support network when they arrive. There's still stigma, racism, discrimination that they face. With their limited English abilities, they really do have trouble navigating in our community when they initially arrive. Individuals have that gap in education or maybe no formal education experience. There is this pressure within the programs to be immediately financially independent. There's cultural bereavement that happens. There's a whole grief experience individuals go through. They lose everything that is familiar to them. Next slide. And so, that's part of the reason why we applied for the program. We really wanted to expand our ability to help our clients navigate barriers and challenges, which I listed on the previous slide. We wanted to increase their social support network of caring individuals would be able to create sort of this positive environment for them. We wanted to help them navigate situations that would be difficult, such as, including language access, that cultural orientation that happens. Making sure that, we alleviate some of the financial sort of burden that they initially, or that pressure they initially feel, was also really important, so that we could focus on meeting their immediate needs, and then, create this sort of network of support for them. In addition to this, through our feedback from our client surveys that we do every year, we also have a refugee advisory committee and a youth advisory committee. We were receiving feedback from them that they really wanted to receive more opportunities for community engagement, and including with our different faith communities. We are also a welcoming county, so we knew that this program would be really well received in our community. And when we first started, we were a bit nervous. We didn't know really. We have a network of about 15 faith communities in our community, and we really weren't sure, what was the best approach, if people would be able to do it because of, what the financial sort of strains of, COVID period. But what surprised us the most is sort of the overwhelming positive response that we received about groups wanting to actually co-sponsor families. And so we were starting to receive emails pretty much this summer from all over our community asking, how can I sponsor individuals? What can we do? And our community response has been so great, including, individuals who are not in our community. So from other cities around our community wanting to also co-sponsor families. In this survey, I wanted to talk about a little bit about how we balance I know there's maybe some other resettlement agencies who don't have this program, who might be thinking about bringing on a co-sponsorship type of program. This is a really interesting time in resettlement for all of the agencies like mine who are resettling individuals, from Afghanistan. We've had to start the APA program and build the APA program while we're actively resettling individuals. And, the infrastructure of this program was not set when we started having individuals arrive into our community. So, while getting another program like co-sponsorship off the ground can be a bit tricky, it actually couldn't come at a better time for us. We're working on harnessing the energy of our community and using it to ensure that we could provide a safe and supportive environment for our APA clients, especially who've gone through and are still going through so much trauma. And so this community support is so, so important for our clients and also for our agency, so that we can make sure we provide the best possible service to individuals. Thank you.
Thank you, Shrina, and thank you all for those excellent presentations. We are getting some fantastic questions in the chat, and I'm trying to bracket some of them here so that we can get into the things that are really clearly on people's minds. And I think the two buckets that I'm really seeing emerge here are questions about how we plug in and also questions about how we hand off. And then I think a few, very specific questions, and maybe for our panelists, if you see one that has a quick answer, just feel free to jump into the chat and answer that if you feel like it's an easy one to do. And so I want to start with this question about plugging in. I know there are opportunities for nonprofits to plug in, or groups who are organized and maybe don't have 501c3 status. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, from the position of that nonprofit organization, what might some of the opportunities be in their community and where would they best start to look for them?
I can tackle that one on. And I also saw a question saying, does it have to be a 501c3 in order to become a co-sponsor? In the newest cooperative agreement, it does not. So a co-sponsor does not have to be a 501c3. From what I've heard, this was actually eliminated because the type of co-sponsor groups that we were attaining were the same type, which was the faith-based retirees. And in order to really expand a co-sponsor group environment, that definition of a co-sponsor does not require a 501c3 status in the cooperative agreement executed by PRM. So how does a nonprofit agency get involved, right, Rachel? That's well, I think in a lot of different ways that we said. So a non-sponsor agency can work with the local resettlement agency in your particular city and become a co-sponsor. Or they can work with that local field office agency and become a support service team. As I use an example, like home setups or enrolling the kiddos into education. Or they can contact one of the local 9 affiliate agencies, IRC being one of them, and become that APA community partner, which means you may not have a local agency in your neighborhood, in your backyard, but you're still interested in participating in community sponsorship. Please reach out to one of the 9 affiliates. And then if you prefer to do something more community-led, then you reach out to Sarah at the sponsor circles and you become a sponsor circle group via her organization and effort.
I imagine that Sarah and Shrina can build on that just in their own experiences. But I want to just, now that we've talked about nonprofits, ask about local government, because I know we've got a lot of folks on here who are situated in a municipal government, city or county government, or a state government. And I think some questions about what should folks in government be thinking about right now? I know, Sarah, you talked a little bit about in the slide that showed all the different areas that sponsors were responsible for, getting kids enrolled in school, for example. But we also know that once kids get to that school, there's a lot of things to attend to. So what do we need to be counting on? What are we counting on our local government partners to be thinking about right now?
Yeah, I would say that there are so many things that local governments can do to help prepare for this moment. We know that it's a challenge because you may not be aware if there's a newcomer coming to your community. I think that's even true for those that are electing to depart the safe havens unsupported. But just to be thinking ahead about how you can be welcoming, and certainly if you're contacted by an affiliate, because affiliates are now placing cases in wider and wider radiuses. US government has eliminated that kind of 100-mile radius rule for placement of cases because we know we need more welcoming communities across the country. That would also be true if you were contacted by a sponsor circle. The other thing I would know is that we've actually been contacted by mayors of towns across the United States that are interested in seeing sponsorship happening in their communities. And again, because we have more resettlement agencies that are engaging in the community sponsorship space, and because sponsor circles and APA partners is now opening up the opportunities to even wider geographic areas, that can happen anywhere. It's really exciting. So that's another thing that local governments can do, is just to reach out to their communities to say, hey, is this something that we have interest in doing? And how can we rally together as a community to bring a newcomer here and provide them with the initial supports that they need for success?
Great. And Shrina, I know you're really playing the role of a lot of this connective tissue. So what are you seeing in Washtenaw County that might be helpful for others to be aware of?
Yeah. So in Washtenaw County, we've met with our local government to see if they're able to put some funding in place to help with especially things like rental assistance. I know in a lot of communities, the Afghans who are coming are being placed in hotels initially. Agencies like mine have done a lot of fundraising, especially after everything kind of happened in August. And so we're, using our own funds as well as trying to work with our communities to help raise funds and other resources. And so part of the work that we're doing is working with our county to get financial resources, but also working with local, like our schools, all of the benefits offices to make sure that they're prepared to handle the number of refugees that and that we've resettled. And our agency we have a very high caseload right now. We've had 137 individuals come in the last 6 weeks. And so, because we've tried to do all this prep work at the very beginning, by working with our local government, hopefully, that way everybody's prepared to do what they need to do as well.
Well, I love seeing that proactive effort, and we know that's such a key to success. And we also know that a lot of places are not going to have the luxury of all that infrastructure and proactive effort. And, we hope that this is a moment to build some of that. And so we've talked about nonprofits, we've talked about local government, and, philanthropy business, I know is in there in the mix too, but I want to talk about individuals now. And what is the best way for individuals to plug in this moment? And maybe Sarah, we can start with you, because I mean, clearly you're creating a mechanism for that to happen more effectively.
Yeah, so there are, fortunately, in this moment, so many opportunities for individuals to connect to community sponsorship opportunities. I think the challenge is just making that succinct and put in one place so it's easy for folks to navigate. As we work on that, which is something we are actively doing, there are a couple of sites that I would commend to folks. One is the RCUSA website for Refugee Council USA. There's a list of community sponsorship opportunities included there, so you can see if there is community sponsorship that's being offered by a resettlement agency in your community. Again, that's resettlement agency led. And then there's also the sponsor circle space. So it's sponsorcircles.org. And you can read about the responsibilities associated with the program and then determine if you want to submit an application. I would note more generally, as we look at the broader community sponsorship space, and I know there was a question about funds to be raised and why does that vary based on agency. Every agency's program is structured a little bit differently, and of course there are different costs of living depending on where you are in the United States, and that's why you see that it varies. Also, some agencies might ask that the money be given to the resettlement agency to be spent on behalf of the newcomer. Some may hold back a small portion. They would tell you in advance to defray the cost of managing that sponsorship experience. Most, it's a full pass through. And in the sponsor circle space, it doesn't pass through anyone. It's just the sponsor circle raises it and then uses it to provide the supports to the newcomers. So it really varies a lot. But again, so many opportunities, which is the really exciting thing in this moment.
Una, Shrina, anything you want to add on that? What do you hope individuals do in this moment?
Well, it is my hope and I speak for the resettlement agencies, it is my hope that those individuals come together as groups. So you go and find, your local PTA. Maybe there's a stay-at-home mom group in your community, your church groups, many others, and you really formalize a formal group. Sorry to say that, but you create a formal group, and then you partake in any type of community sponsorship opportunities that we presented, whether that be the sponsor circles route, or whether that be with like me and Shrina working with the resettlement agency as a co-sponsor or as an APA community partner. So that would be my advice.
I would just echo what Una said. We recently had a small congregation approach us, and we were able to pair them up with a larger congregation so that they could participate still. And so I think even if you think that, we're such a small group, it's worth it to reach out and to see maybe if you can work with another group that agency has as a part of, we're doing co-sponsorship program, but as a co-sponsor so that you can still participate in a very meaningful way.
Well, so inspiring to hear all of these ways to get involved. I want to just go to one question that a couple of people asked, and this might end up being our last question here. A few people mentioned the 90-day period and what happens at the end of that. Does anyone want to speak to that?
I can kick us off and then I'll look to the ladies to follow up. So we're very keenly aware that 90 days is not adequate support for a newcomer. And that's certainly true within the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program with reception and placement. Sponsor Circles was set up to mirror those programs, even as we know that it's not really enough time for all of the supports needed. But what I would note too is that it's an emergency initiative, and we had to be conscious of that in actually designing the program. Core in all of those programs is that the newcomer is connected with ongoing supports. And I think it again speaks to the really critical work that Welcoming America is doing to ensure that folks are conscious of the needs of newcomers and also the many strengths and benefits that they offer to our communities. It's important that newcomers get connected to those ongoing supports, and community sponsorship is such a powerful way to do that because it's a group of individuals coming together with various skill sets and backgrounds. You could have someone who is an educator in the community and someone else who has done financial management, and they can bring all of those supports to the space to really increase the newcomers' access to social capital and make meaningful connections in the community that will extend for them beyond the 90-day period. And then just even more practically, folks are not giving up the other benefits to which they're entitled. So SNAP, cash assistance, medical assistance, other ORR funded services like state funded employment services, those are still available to folks. We want them to be connected to those services because that will help to carry them on for a further period of time.
I want to answer that one just a little bit. 90 days is super scary. And in the first 90 days, we're, the refugee family still trying to figure it out, still trying to adjust to their new environment. So is 90 days enough? No, absolutely not. So speaking from a resettlement agency standpoint, what we try to do with our families after the reception and placement period is connect them to other programs, whether that's state programs, whether that's employment programs like matching grant. And the same pertains here. So just because there is a community sponsorship approach and it ends after the first 90 days, it does not mean that after the 90 days, the family cannot join one of the other programs. And as I mentioned, like state programs or matching grant programs or ICM programs, there's so many out there the resettlement agencies can have. So it does not prevent, I just want to make sure that is clear, like enrollment into other programs, the post 90 days programs, community sponsorship does not prevent that at all. So a family, even with a community sponsor, can receive ongoing services.
And I completely agree with what Una and Sarah had mentioned and echo that. And I would also just add that if this is a program that you're considering doing, it's really important to scope your community and see what other services are available for the families, post that 90-day period, so that you can do that direct referral and you're already familiar with those agencies that are offering those services and you have that direct connection to them. And that's a part of your, homework that you would do to be part of this, this program.
Well, I want to just note here, I've been given a reprieve here in our timing and hope that our panelists can join us for a little while longer. And I think that will give us some time to get a little further into this. So wanted to note that I'm really glad that all of you are touching on this question of sort of mapping your own community and the ecosystem that exists there. And I'm wondering, from your experiences working at a community level, what are some of the resources or ways to get started in doing that if you're not somebody that's deeply steeped in this work?
I would just note that even if folks are not interested in going the sponsor circle route, the welcome plan that exists on the site can be a useful resource as you think through what are some of the things that we need to do in order to be prepared and what resources are necessary in our community to support this occurring. Another possibility is to, of course, reach out to your resettlement agency, but we know that resettlement agencies in this moment don't have a whole lot of time to have extensive conversations with folks. So again, using what you're able to find online, I think is a great start. And to go back to a point that Una made earlier, I don't think that folks, and I think actually Shrina talked about this as well, folks shouldn't be discouraged if they don't have a big group that they can work with in order to make this happen. There are lots of opportunities to partner with others in the space. In fact, I think it's a great way to get to know members of your community. Years ago, when I was doing co-sponsorship development, I remember pairing two churches in a nearby community with one another. And there were really meaningful bonds that were created, not only with the refugee family, but also amongst the two groups. And again, they were able to identify additional resources in the area through the various members that were engaged in that space.
Shrina, how about for you? What have you experienced in just trying to assess what the resources are? And then as a resettlement agency, how can others be a good partner to you in this moment?
Yeah. So we have a pretty small community in Washtenaw County, and most of the resettlement and post-resettlement services lie within our agency. And so, it was fairly easy for us to be able to incorporate APA into our organization because we have that continuum of services that are within our organization. We don't have to go too much out of our organization to get everybody what they need. But what I would recommend, if you're a community like ours where there is a established resettlement agency, reach out to them and say, hey, we're like a group of, 15, 20, whatever, 30 people. How can we help as a group with refugees, SIVs, and Afghan parolees that are coming into our community? What can we do? And I guarantee they will have an answer for you. And hopefully, many more communities will join that co-sponsorship model so that we can, work in partnership with some of these larger community groups that are wanting to help out.
That's great. Una, I know I'm sure you have an opinion on this. What's your thought on that?
So very similar. I'm a resettlement agency too, right? Where Shrina's in the field, I'm at the headquarters level, but very similar. But also, I just want to speak a little bit on behalf of all the resettlement agencies, and I hope I'm not out of line, but they're really busy, busier than probably they've ever been. And I think that we should have a little bit of grace if there is a slower response time than usual. If Shrina and her team don't respond within 48 hours or 72 hours, it's okay to ping them again, but please be understanding that the local field offices are at capacity or overworking capacity. There's a lot of new staff that they're onboarding and really trying to figure out so many different things at once. So I agree. Please do reach out to your local resettlement agencies. Please reach out to the us at the headquarters level, but just have a little bit of grace with our local field offices as they are really encountering some really challenging times and extremely overworked.
Appreciate that. And I'm sure other folks on this call do. I remember working a few years ago on a tool around engaging volunteers and resettlement agencies were strapped then. And so I can only imagine now. And I love the idea of just encouraging community-based organizations or residents to organize themselves before coming with some offers. I think that's a great insight. I think we have a little bit more time to continue this conversation, but I want to make sure that we get into a little bit beyond the current moment and think a little bit ahead. So I know folks are starting to begin to move off of bases now. And I wonder if you could just help us sort of look ahead to what the next month is going to look like, and then maybe the next 6 months of this work and what's going to be needed at those different phases.
I guess I can start. So if you think the local field offices are busy now, we can start with that. I think the next month and up until February of 2022, we will see huge hiring within the resettlement world. So if you ever wanted to work for your local resettlement agency, the time is now. So positions are posted, new positions regularly amongst all 9 resettlement agencies. So hiring, massive hiring and massive influx of clients getting off bases and, being allocated and being supported by your local field offices in your local cities. So I think the next few months are going to be extremely busy. I think busier than now, but I also think that there's a lot of opportunity there, a lot of opportunity to hire new people, to get involved in resettlement, and a lot of opportunity for community groups to gather and assist in this process.
As a working on the ground, the next, like Una said, until February, we'll be actively resettling so many people. And we're, currently, I think around the country, housing is an issue. And so hopefully, as we work through arrivals, we're also working through getting everybody housed and everybody employed and everybody, especially with our co-sponsorship program, we have some families who are paired with our local congregations and are working with them. I think for the population that is coming right now, trauma we've been seeing a ton of trauma. And so really thinking mindfully about how we make sure that they retain some sort of community connection so that they feel grounded here is really important for us. And so that's something that we'll be working on, at least for the foreseeable future, as we get everybody sort of like the tangible needs and, basic needs taken care of. That's like the secondary. And so, part of that is making sure that they do have a connection to our community and they feel welcome in our community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to come back to that in just a moment, but just to finish up this question around sort of the next few months and maybe weave in, I saw in the chat here a question about scale, really. How many people are we talking about moving into communities? And I know we don't really know, Sarah, but is there a little more that you can share about that?
We stated we don't really know. I think it's going to be really interesting over the next several weeks as folks start to learn about this opportunity and begin to pull together their applications. This is just so folks are aware, there's what we would say a delta between reported resettlement agency capacity and how many folks are in need of placement in communities across the United States. I mean, there are 10,000 that we need to be identifying means of support for. Sponsor circles is not intended, it is not likely that it is going to cover that 10,000. We're looking at much more modest numbers because it is such a significant undertaking. So we're just trying to manage expectations in this space as to how many folks might be supported through this program, but it really is driven by group interest and then of course capacity in those communities, which would be determined through completion of those welcome plans. So we'll see what should happen. I would note that there are a number of regional organizations and even national organizations that are interested in engaging the space as umbrella organizations. And those folks, again, would be recruiting from among their own constituencies. Highest, as an example, is one that is interested in serving as an umbrella organization. And that's really exciting. We're expecting to see larger numbers because of that active recruitment that would be taking place, but we want to make certain that we're doing it well. So not pushing too hard, just waiting to see what happens.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to come back to something that Shrina shared, which reminded me of an important principle, and maybe we can talk a little bit about what principles are guiding each of you in this work. But I know one that was important to us as we were stepping back to think about how we could just be thoughtful in this moment and make sure it was really a moment for building and reinforcing welcoming infrastructure and some of the principles of work that we know are really important, including really tapping into the wisdom, the knowledge, the expertise, the capacity of Afghan communities themselves and former refugees. And so I'm wondering where you're seeing that happen in positive ways that might help other people think about how to do that effectively, respectfully?
I can maybe kick us off and then turn it over to the ladies. So as we are working to really kind of hone in on what this model looks like and how it can be effectively implemented, of course, engaging with Afghan diaspora and design of that program, I think is really critical. And I think that's true of community sponsorship programs across the board. That's a best practice as you're working to design your program, is to engage with your refugee community, drawing on their own experiences. I know Una can speak to this as a former refugee. And then the other piece of that is engaging diaspora potentially as sponsors themselves. And that's something that we're seeing in the Sponsor Circle program within Afghan diaspora, but also like we just received our first Sponsor Circle application from a group called Viet for Refugees. So these are Vietnamese refugees who want to welcome in the same way that they were welcomed to the United States many years ago. And so for me, that's a really powerful example of welcome and something that we can build upon in moving forward. And I would say too, going back to another question about community sponsorship for U.S. Thai cases or for non-U.S. Thai cases, I think it's for all cases. And if you are a U.S. Thai that is really interested in providing additional wraparound supports, but you feel overwhelmed at the prospect of doing it on your own, being able to partner with others in your community is just fantastic, and also a really powerful way to build connections in the community. So lots of opportunities in that space. And just one other quick note, I think this is important to say as we look at community sponsorship more broadly. A lot of thought has gone into really centering refugees in this process. There are a number of folks who are doing some very interesting work in this space. Sometime back, there was a guide that was developed that is called Community Sponsorship and Active Allyship. That's available on the RCUSA website. The training that's provided in sponsor circles asks folks to consider privilege and privacy, power, all of those pieces. So something that we just have to keep asking of ourselves as we build out the space.
And I want to jump on because Rachel, I really appreciate this question. I love a good success story, as I'm sure you all do too. I'm going to share two from the IRC, one that is pretty ginormous. IRC actually did the co-sponsorship agreement with ASU. So our Phoenix office co-sponsored with Arizona State University. So going back to that chart, the co-sponsor, meaning there is a local field office, which is Phoenix, and the sponsor group was ASU, to sponsor 67 young ladies who are now at bases, and they will be not only living at ASU dorms. For those of you who went to undergrad, they will get meal plans by ASU, which is huge. If you remember, ASU will provide health services. ASU will provide employment services. ASU, majority of the core service delivery, Arizona State University is taking on, including paying for their education. This is not your typical co-sponsor agreement. This is something above and beyond, but it is something that we're so proud of, and as it shows that it is possible for these university partners to do something so ginormous like that. 67 lives will be changed, and they will be all students at Arizona State University. And then going back a little bit to the APA Community Partner Program, as it is something so new, I think there was a question asked, well, who's going to notify the state refugee coordinators and others about all of these things. So with the APA Community Partner Program, I received my first application, a partner in Honolulu, Hawaii, which doesn't have any resettlement agency presence, right? So it is a state where there's not there's no specific organization is receiving refugees. So this community partner that IRC established will be assisting 2 cases of Afghan clients that will be living in Honolulu, Hawaii. So that is also a really nice success story in a sense to see how that works, how we are going. And with that, the state refugee coordinator did have to be notified. And I initiated that contact, informed the state refugee coordinator that Afghan refugees are coming to Honolulu, Hawaii. I introduced them to the community partner on the grounds just to make sure that that process is established and that the state is aware.
I think for us, one of the things that, in addition to just, the enormous amount of volunteer support we've gotten and interest in volunteering for us, it's the creativity within our community that's really come forward. We recently had a local university, Eastern Michigan University, when we put out this sort of mass message, and they responded with, okay, mass message of housing. And they responded with, we have 2 apartment buildings that are not filled. How can we make sure that we provide that housing for the refugees and, Afghan parolees that you're going to be resettling? And so having these, conversations with employers who are coming forward and saying, we want to hire 15 people. How can we do that? And us saying, hey, there's no bus line in your area. Is there housing in your area that you could then transport individuals to, and that we could then place, start a community in? And so, it's one, individuals reaching out to agencies and individuals who we resettle and being that welcoming presence, but it's also industries thinking about how they could contribute to this and think creatively in how to address some of the other issues that we're experiencing, like transportation and housing and, financial obligations. And so I would just encourage, if anybody does have, isn't really sure how they can help, be creative, reach out to those, local agencies and ask, how can we partner together?
That's great. And, one thing I've been thinking about a lot, I think one of the most challenging narratives that we often face in this work is that everything is chaos. And I think and even though things are very challenging now and maybe a little bit more messy than most of us would feel comfortable with, I think the beauty of this work and what you're all describing really is that we have the ability to lean into that and really build our capacity to be responsive. And I think, that's such a counter to that message in a really powerful way. We can be welcoming communities, and so many different kinds of people and organizations in our communities can and are and historically have stepped forward in moments like these to really build that capacity. So I just am excited to highlight everything that is unfolding, and also remember some of our stories from the past. And your example of bus lines just reminded me of the story of Boise, Idaho, who was facing, honestly, some backlash many years ago as they were starting their resettlement program and really bringing the community together to create the Refugee Resource Action Plan, which then led to this much more robust infrastructure, a deeper community conversation, and a switch in their bus lines, which had the benefit of not only supporting refugees who were just arriving and needed to get to their jobs, but really everyone in the community to be able to access employment and get to see, the people in places they needed to. And I think that's the power of this work, is really to reinforce that equity infrastructure. And so I hope we'll use this moment to do all of that. And that's my hope and vision for what exists in the next couple of years that we can build from here. And I'd love to just end by asking each of you, what's your highest aspiration for all of this going well? And what would you like to see in 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
I would just offer one anecdote that I heard from our friends in Canada, and that was back in 2015, 2016, they surveyed Canada's population and found that almost 1/4 of the population had either sponsored a family or contributed to a sponsoring group. a quarter of the population that was connected to refugees. And that was largely credited with helping to protect their program from the rise in anti-refugee sentiment that was being seen around the world. For me, that's really powerful and ultimately what this is about. We want to give folks a real sense of connection and ownership of the work so that the work continues and that more folks are able to find safety in the United States and around the world. So for me, this is a real opportunity for us to build towards that space.
How about for you, Shrina?
I have a lot of hopes. But I think one thing that always comes to mind, it's maybe because I have young children myself, is, 50% of the individuals who resettle are under the age of 18. And so my hope for them is that, and especially this population that's coming now, they're seeing a lot of really terrible things happening. And they've experienced a lot of terrible things, in their journey here. And so I hope that at least in the next 5 years that they feel like this is their home. They can feel that connection in the community, that they will be welcomed and accepted by their peers. And hopefully, especially for my community, we work really hard to make sure that people have access to not only the resources that they need, but also are able to contribute what they feel like they can contribute to our community. And so that's probably my greatest hope, is that we can create this environment of sharing and respect for each other.
Una, how about for you?
Yeah, so I'm gonna I want to be a little blunt, Rachel, right? So what are my hopes? My hopes are that what happened to us a few years ago never happened again. It was really hard laying staff off. It was really hard closing offices. It was really, really difficult. Me being of the Muslim faith, going through a Muslim ban, a majority of the refugees from Bosnia are of the Muslim faith. And I remember when the Muslim ban was created, calling my mother, crying like, "Mom, like, think about it. If this was back in 1994, we never would have came here." And, so it was, that is my hope. So how do I hope that happens? I hope that with all the community involvement and hope with all the bipartisan support, and I think we really need to drill that message that refugee resettlement is completely bipartisan. This is a humanitarian issue, not a political issue. And then we don't make it a political issue again. And then we continue supporting and welcoming these different communities into our country. And regardless of leadership, regardless of political affiliation, that the program continues to thrive and assist the most vulnerable populations of the world.
Well, I know when my own family came to the United States, fleeing persecution before there was a refugee resettlement program, but they were refugees in their own way. Those were the values that really made them feel that this would be a place of safety and opportunity for them. And I think, the values that we can, again, really enshrine and reinforce in the infrastructure that we build, again, not just for those who are newly coming, but for all those who call themselves or aspire to call themselves Americans, a place of equality and opportunity. And so I truly hope and believe that we can do that. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, as Jordan is reminding me here kindly in the chat, a document that Welcoming America and many other partners put together as we were heading down this path and are now going to be revising and sending out to everyone who was on the call today, and it'll be on our website too. Just some tips around how we can really use this moment to redouble welcoming infrastructure at the local level, the narrative and policies at all levels, so that this value of being welcoming is one that will carry us forward and carry our democracy forward. So just want to thank every person who joined this call, and again, just a huge thanks to our speakers for the work that you do, and knowing how much is on your shoulders now. Just appreciate your taking time to have this conversation with us, and just thank you, and hope everyone goes forward knowing that you are not in this alone. We just so appreciate the work that you do. Please keep in touch with us if there's anything we can do to support your efforts. We are here. And thanks so much for joining the call today. Take care, everyone.